How's everyone doing tonight? Good. Thank you so much for being here. It means a lot to me to be in this room. I took a class here with Gordon Lish in 2010 while I was maybe like 6 months before my first book came out and I was writing my first novel. I was just telling Rosie, there's, as many of you probably know, there's sort of like the cubicles on the top floor where people are up there doing their work here. And I wrote part of that book in this building. It's really exciting to sort of get to be here in the same room I had class in to get to read and talk to Annie, who I'm a huge fan of, her new book. So thank you so much for being here. I think the plan is we're both going to read for like 10 or 12 minutes, and then we'll have a conversation with each other, and then hopefully open up to questions and anything you'd like to know. As I always tell my students, if you have concerns or comments or angers, that would be a good time for that. So hopefully we'll get to all three. I'm going to read just two really short stories from the new book. The first one is a story called Her Aeneid. It's in sort of 9 parts. It's a woman who's become pregnant. She's sort of imagining these sort of different things her child might be while it's growing inside her. Then I'm going to read a second sort of parenting story from a husband's point of view in a very different situation. Thank you again. Her baby is a joke, a tiny bundle of cells dividing, too small to be taken seriously. For another week or two, it will still be smaller than the benign tumor she had removed from her breast 2 years ago, a realization that leaves her touching the place where that lump once was. She jokes about this to her friends, who don't find it funny. She doesn't either, but she can't stop herself from sharing about her tumor-sized baby, growing and growing, taking over her body. This time, no one wants her to stop it or get rid of it. This time, people say congratulations and hug her instead of pretending she's contagious, instead of forgetting her number until they hear she's better. Like before, she's only angry because everyone always assumes they already know exactly how she feels. She is careful to keep her true feelings to herself. See that, as with the tumor, there is much she could lose. Her baby is a seed, barely planted, but already pushing roots through its waxy coat, searching for the dank soil it needs to grow inside her. She pictures it flowering, but knows it'll be years before her baby is old enough for flowers, for seeds of its own. Her doctor emphasizes nutrition, suggests she drinks 6 to 8 glasses of water every day. At home, she holds her face under the faucet, her throat pried open to swallow all the water she can. When she stands, her face and neck and shirt are soaked through. She puts her lips back to the flowing water and drinks again, as deep as she can, as deep as she knows she must. Her baby is a stone, cool and dark, something formed not in an instant, as she always assumed her baby would be, but instead over an age, an epoch. Everything about her pregnancy progresses slower than she'd imagined it would. She pictures her stone skipping across the hidden darkness of a lake, each point of contact a ripple expanding and then disappearing. She practices skipping stones herself while she waits for the baby to come, transforming every ditch and puddle and pond and lake into a microcosm, into a point of departure, a possible place where one day she will have to let go. Her baby is a thunderstorm, a bundle of negatively and positively charged ions about to interact violently. It is a hurricane, or a monsoon, or a tsunami, but she doesn't know which, doesn't know how to tell the difference. She feels it churning inside, growing stronger with each revolution. What happens after the baby comes will be different than what happened before. This is storm as cataclysm. Whole countries she once knew will be swept away, their inhabitants scattered and replaced by new citizens, other mothers and other children, in whose company she knows she will have to spend the rest of her life. Her baby is a bird, mottled with gray and brown feathers, that will last only until the end of its infancy, when it will molt into splendor. Its mouth is open wide, waiting expectantly. Sometimes, when she lies still in her quiet apartment, she can hear cawing from her round belly. She has cravings, contemplates eating quarters, little bits of tinfoil, even a pair of silver earrings. She hopes her baby is building a beautiful nest inside of her. She wants to give it everything it needs so that it might never leave. This is nest as lie, nest as false hope. Her baby is a bird of prey, something she has never been this close to before. All those talons, all that beak, it hooks her, devours her. They're both so hungry. She eats and eats. Before this, she never knew birds had tongues. Her baby is a knife, a dagger, a broadsword, sharp and terrible. Her baby is dangerous. If she isn't careful, then one day it will hurt her, hurt others. When it kicks, she feels its edges pressed against the walls of its sheath, drawing more blood in a sea of blood. She is careful when she walks, not to bump into solid objects, not to put herself in harm's way. She wonders how it will hurt to push it from her body, to have the doctor tug her baby from her body as if from a stone. Her baby is a furred thing, alternately bristled and then soft. She hopes it isn't shedding, wonders how she'll ever get all that hair out of her if it is. She searches online for images of badgers and then wolverines, looking for something to recognize in their faces. She types the words, creatures that burrow, then adds a question mark and tries again. The baby is so warm inside her, curled in on itself, waiting for winter to end, for a day to come when all the breath it's been holding can finally be expelled, like heat fogging the air of a still cold morning. Sometimes, when the baby rolls over and makes itself known, she can almost smell it. Now the water breaking, now the dilation of the cervix, now the first real contraction, more potent than any of the false warnings she experienced before. Now the worry that this is too early, that she hasn't learned yet what her baby is supposed to be. Now the lack of thought and the loss of discernible time. Now the pain, which is sharp and dull and fast and slow, which is both waves and particles at the same time. Now the hurry, the burst into motion after the near year of waiting. Now the push, the pushing, the rushing stretch of her suddenly elastic body, expanding to do this thing, to give birth to this baby. Now the joke, the seed, the stone, the storm, the bird, the sword. Now the tiny mammal, warm-blooded and hot. And yes, now the head covered in wet hair. Now the shoulders. Now the torso and the arms. Now the hip bones and the thighs and the knees and the feet. Now the first breath. Now the eyes opening, now the cry calling out to her like deja vu, like the recognition of someone from a dream. Now the baby, now the baby, now the baby, an event repeating for the rest of her life. Her baby is a boy. Her baby is a girl. Her baby is potential energy changing to kinetic, is a person gaining momentum. Her baby is a possibility, or rather a string of possibilities and potentialities stretching forward from her towards something still unknowable. With the baby in her arms, she smiles, she coos, she tells her baby it can be whatever it wants to be. She tells her baby that no matter what it turns out to be, she will always recognize it when it comes back to her. There is no shape that could hide her baby from her. There is no form that could make her turn her back on it. She says this like a promise, swears it like she can make it true, like it's just that easy. Some days, no matter what she says, her baby cries and cries and cries. I'm going to read just one more really short piece, much shorter than that one, which is from a novella that's collected in this book. The novella is called Cataclysm Baby, and is a series of 26 parenting stories that are after the apocalypse. These sort of different ends of the world. So each story is its own end of the world, and are these sort of monologues by fathers who are dealing with all kinds of disaster, and also often like children that are not like the kind of children we typically have. And so this is from late in the book. They all have these alphabetical titles where there's 3 names, and so this is Sabara, Sabetta, Silvana, and this father has children that burrow through the earth, as you sometimes do. Savara, Savetta, Savannah. See now our subterranean daughters, our dark-eyed beauties, so impossible to keep in their wicker cribs, to keep inside our rude-made gravedigger's hut, perched at the rent edge of this barren plot. See them squirm free of their cribs, their new and segmented bodies falling to the packed dirt floor, down and out of this house I built for them and their mother. See me with shovel and mattock, tearing up the flooring, uncovering tunnels, chambers, new and deeper rooms. See them tangled in one another's sleeping bodies, keeping each other warm in the dampness of the earth, their spade thumbs sucked and suckled in the absence of us, their parents. See what watch I keep, what eyes I fix on their crib, but see also how it is never enough. All day there are piles of the plague to keep into graves. All night there is their sick mother, bedridden, her vulgar pains leaving her no chance of sleep. See me feed their mother through her stomach tube. See me soak her sore skin. See her tears at the rub of the sponge, the touch of the soap. See our daughters taking advantage of my absence to again escape the confines of their cribs. See me waking to their 3 tiny gowns beside 3 tiny holes, 3 petite piles of spent dirt, then to their wailing mother in the next room. See me digging up the floor to find their burrows empty. See me on my knees, reaching into the dirt, feeling their new passages, exit vectors from the confines of our home, our yard, 3 tunnels for 3 baby girls, each in a direction of its own. See my wife, their mother, my fading light. See me cutting her screaming hair while she cries for our children to return. See also what I do not do. See me not covering the burrows, not filling in the caved pit of our kitchen floor, the room where I fed our daughters porridge after prying free the grubs and beetles they held stubborn in their hands and mouths. See the day my wife loses her last voice, the day she sends me from the room with weak flurries of spotted hands, because if she cannot have her daughters, she does not want me instead. See how I crawl down into the dirt, into the sunken ruins of our home. See me whisper into the center of the earth. See me beg our daughters to come back, to visit their mother once more before she is gone. See the day they emerge together, clothed only in gray dirt. See how they've grown, how their toddling days have ended, how some new age is upon them. See next their fishes clenched, or on ginger in burdock, or on echinacea, or on licorice in marshmallow. See me gather them up onto my chest. See me carry all 3 at once in my arms. See me take them into our bedchamber, their hands stuffed with the medicine they traveled so far to find. See until you cannot see anymore, then listen. Their first words in turn, 3 broken intonations of cure and mother and save her, save her. What stories they tell then, of places they have gone, of the things they have seen. What hard hurt of my heart follows, what ungrantable wish shaping this trembling flesh, this poor gravedigger, again made quaking father. Listen, the sound of herbs hitting the floor is a whisper, then a word. Roots collapse, tubers tumble, and what sentence can follow? What good noise can I make for my daughters then, clinging reluctant to my body, this earth they no longer love? Thank you very much.
It's so interesting hearing you read that, Matt, because now we won't have this discussion now, but I just have to throw this out there. I was thinking, there's this great Philip Lope essay where he was talking about James Baldwin's essays in Notes from a Native Son, and he was saying he's got that kind of like call and response type of like oratic style of sort of garnered from like watching his dad as a preacher for years, and then also that kind of like very plain-spoken, I think he said plain-spoken man of the street language, to quote him, and it reminded me so much of the way you were reading. So now I won't talk about that, but okay. All right, this is White Nights in Split Town City. I don't think we need too much Background. It is a novel. It's set in the summer of 1991, so it takes place literally over a single summer. To think back, that's the sort of the summer that the first Gulf War started in the pre-internet ages. And it's a novel set in the first person. The narrator's name is Jean, and she's about 12 years old, and it takes place in a small rural dead-end road. So I'm going to read just a little bit of the opening and then skip forward to a quick shorter chapter. All right, chapter 1. The car appeared to descend from the sky like the old gray pigeons that skirted the power lines tracing the upheaval of the mountain. Fender, the youngest of the abandoned Steelhead brothers, was sprawled out horizontal over top of the Jeep, a dare the older boys had put him up to. Maybe he was shackled at the ankles. Maybe he was relying on his own good grip. It looked as though his brothers had strapped him there, turned the nose of the 4x4 down the trail, and put the vehicle in neutral. By the time the Jeep had gained enough speed, it reached the turnoff onto our little road, and its body absorbed any imperfections in the macadam, surfing and heaving over the skids of gravel, catching a bit of that warm summer air. Mother stood beside me. We were on our way out to the garden. We stared at the back of Fender's head as it hurtled towards us, and the wind took his shirt and its colors billowed up around his face. Lydon, the eldest of the Steelhead brothers, was at the wheel. One of his arms rested across the horn, the other straddled the shoulders of a young girl in a neon tank. The rest of the boys were in the back tending the beer. A long-haired kid tossed cans of Miller High Life out the rear, exploding them over the road. The gold of the can flared in the sunlight before the aluminum burst from the pressure. This was the summer of 1990. The Berlin Wall fell. The Hubble Space Telescope launched. Mandela was released from prison. Microsoft released a disk which father brought home from work called Windows. Mikhail Gorbachev, the big red splot my sister Bertie called him, was elected. In school, we gathered our pennies to save the whales from Exxon Valdez. Ryan White died of AIDS. What's AIDS? Bertie said. It's a disease of the blood which came from a flight attendant, my mother said over breakfast as Bertie and I discussed the image of the missing girl up the street which plagued the side of our milk cartons. McDonald's had a sign in the window, Moscow, Shenzhen. My dad read to us from the Whole Earth catalog, and Mother framed a photo called The Pale Blue Dot, which hung over the television. And on weekends, we watched pirated VHS copies of The Big Chill. When Mom turned up the radio real loud and sang, I heard it through the grapevine, I wondered what the grapevine was and what it was they had heard through it. The night Billy Crystal announced Dances with Wolves beat out Ghost for Best Picture, Dad said the whole world had gone soft. That's your dad's girlfriend, Mom said to Bertie and I, pointing at Demi Moore on the screen. I love that you get cold when it's 71 degrees out, Dad said dramatically, taking Mother in his arms, reenacting his favorite scene from When Harry Met Sally. I came here tonight because when you realize you want to spend the rest of your life with somebody, you want the rest of your life to start as soon as possible. Look around you, Mother said, motioning to Bertie and I and the house in the background. It already started. So that's the lead up, and I'm just going to read a very short little bit from a further on chapter about fishing. So, let's see. 13. The mother ends up abandoning the family, and in her absence, the father is watching over the children. Let's see. Ooh, sorry, I thought I had this. Okay. Sorry. And the father is about to go on a fishing trip. Sorry, Dan. Smart. This is awkward. Sorry.
You could sing a little word.
I can sing. We can just sing old like Motown tunes while I figure this out. Oh my god, I thought it was chapter 11. Now I'm losing my mind. Okay. Here we go. Okay. Excellent, chapter 12. So this is a chapter when the father goes fishing with an old buddy of his. The mom's has already abandoned the house, which is called the bottom feeder. And Jean and her sister Bertie are sort of left to fend for themselves. The next day, father went fishing with Ray. That morning, the house sprinted into the world. I woke to the sound of father crashing about the crawl space in the basement, looking for his pole and box of tackle. Night was still in the air, and with it that impermanent glimpse of other seasons with their welcome respite from the sun and the heat. Father had put a pot of coffee out in the kitchen. The dim yellow light shone over the stove when I came in. Who knew a man like that had ever seen the right side of 6 a.m., Father said as Ray powered down the engine of his truck in our driveway, relaxing in the cab for a moment to smoke the last of his cigarette. Bertie and I carried bags of ice onto the lawn, and Ray tore open the bags with the back of his switchblade. He unloaded several six-packs into the row of coolers closest to the tailgate, stirring the ice around with the back of his hand, burying the bottles under the blonde frost. When the brews are gone, Rick, what do you say we fill these coolers with bass, Ray said. I'd say you've outdone yourself, Ray, Father said. I like a man who outdoes himself. I'll be back with the cold cuts and the bread. We might have a hankering for something hearty out there. As the two men made eye contact, Father chuckled, running his hand under the visor on his temple. Father was a man who spent most of his life trying to cultivate a ready laugh. Though he was built like a workhorse, when it came to conversation, he had more of the dancer than the boxer in him. Back in a minute, he said, jogging up the walk to the house. Good man, Ray said, with that sportiness that came from years of playing football and working in the army. In his eyes, no man who knew the burden of having a wife and kids was outside the purview of an honest day fish. That day, I was to spend the morning with Margaret. Bertie would stay at home with Kay. Mother had made the arrangements. You sure you don't want to come along with us, lady? Ray said as he hoisted himself into the driver's seat, shutting the door and turning the key in the ignition. We've always got room in the dinghy for a deckhand. So I hear, I laughed. Ray said, well then, do me a favor. Tell Margaret your old man and I went fishing without a license. That should give her something to rail on for a while. I looked at him for a moment. For a barber, he had a rough face. His stubble was gray and patchy. There was a thin grease in his hair, which appeared rumpled from the last place he'd run his hands through it. Despite the hour, his eyes were alive and fresh. I could tell there was nothing malicious in his jest. He was a man who woke on the right side of circumstance and liked to lend some humor to the day when he could. Scott's honor, I said. And go in there.
Thanks so much. It was great to get to hear you.
It's so great to read with you. Oh, now comes the fun part.
I know, right? Well, we'll dispense with mutual admiration and move into the interrogation.
Okay.
Which would be good.
Yeah. I have this weird masterpiece theater type of feeling right now.
Yeah.
Did you ever watch that television show?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Where they had like a man in a big velvet chair talking about movies?
Yeah,
anyway.
absolutely. I was going to bring my big leather-bound version of your book to
exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a first question for you.
Let's do it.
Is that cool?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I was particularly interested in this passage. It actually comes from the very last story in the collection. So I've been completely enamored with Matt's collection ever since I read the title, A Tree, a Person, or a Wall, which I just think is so fantastic. And this is the very last story called A Long Walk with Only Chalk to Mark the Way. But it kind of struck me that this particular paragraph was almost like a guide for the way that we were supposed to read the story collection in general. So there's a lot of like repetitions of these like mazes and maps and people kind of searching for things in these stories. And so the passage says this, if I can quote you.
No, please, yeah.
Okay. The book was many things, although even the father did not know this at first. The book was a story and a guide and a map, one that pointed the way through a maze with sentences and paragraphs instead of symbols and lines, so that even before the father told the boy there was a maze to be solved, the book was already teaching him how he might do such a thing, if only he paid attention, if only he were careful. And I wondered if you might kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think, well, thank you first. I'm really glad that stuck out. And it's funny because I think I have like a passage from your book that I also felt like was a guide to your book that I want to talk about. So it's funny how that works. We're looking for keys to each other's, worlds in different ways. But I think one of the things that I realized, so the stories in this book come up from like a 10-year period or so. So it's a big chunk of my sort of writing life. And as I was putting them together, one of the things that became really apparent to me was that characters are often people, for me, that are dealing with some kind of trauma or some kind of grief. In this case, kind of, the story is about a father and a son who's the mother's passed away when the son was born, and the son is dying of a disease that makes him age very quickly. So he's like kind of living his whole life in like a short period. And the husband, or the father and the son, are treating the hospital. The book they're reading is the Labyrinth myth, sort of Greek myth, and they're treating the hospital as if it's a labyrinth, and they go out every day and try to like solve the maze of the hospital. And I think one of the things that I realized that I was writing a lot of stories in this period, and maybe always, where people had these traumas or griefs or fears that they were trying to deal with, and they're looking for like organizing systems. They're looking for ways to contain them, right? If I can put them in a story, if I can put them in a system. There's a story I read the other night at Franklin Park. It's a family that suffered a series of murders, and the story's in the form of an index, and it's the
That's
last.
my favorite one.
Oh, thank you. The last son is like organizing all this data about what happened to them, all this evidence. And so I think often like my characters are looking for these like, how can I get the things that have happened to me into an understandable story that will make me feel safe, or will make me able to heal, or will somehow teach me like what to do next.
Interesting.
And I think, so in that way, right, like if we just follow this story right, we can come out of this place that we're in to the other side.
Right. What's on the other side, just out of curiosity?
In this particular one? Well, I think the idea is if you go into the labyrinth myth is you would defeat the monster and you would come out and everybody would be saved, which is, maybe not the way this particular story is going to end for the son, at least. But
indeed not. No
indeed
one
not.
is saved.
So,
I don't want to ruin the ending, but it doesn't end well.
Except for maybe it's really the father's telling the story to himself, right? And that he has to suffer these things. So I think that's part of it. But I think I also, maybe that's all I'll say about that. So can I ask you a question about the same part of yours?
Yeah.
I have it on my phone, which is so awful looking. I hate watching people use technology on stage, but here we go.
I don't think we'll hold it against you.
Yes, I'm traveling from Arizona, so don't have all my books with me. So there's a part early in your book that I really, really love, and I think one of the things I just love in general about your book is that, as you probably all heard in the parts Annie read, you have this amazing sort of careful detail to sort of, or eye for detail and these tiny parts of sort of lived life, but then you imbue them towards sort of greatness or like the myths of our lives or the way we're doing things. And there's this part early in the book where Jean is talking about her father going out walking and smoking cigars, right? And she goes out walking through their town. White owls, yeah. And there's this great detail about her stealing her dad's white owl wrappers, like from the back of the car, which is just this great, like she's...
Yeah, just a side note, that was one of those funny details that I actually had to go back and look up online because I had a memory of what those cigars looked like, and I can like pinpoint the smell of them, like, within like an inch of my life.
Right.
But it was funny because then when I went and looked at the actual wrappers, I had originally thought there was little like pink roses on them. I don't know what, this is like a Freudian story, I guess.
Sure, yeah.
There was no pink rose. It is the white owl that's on there.
Which makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Why would a white owl be pink rose?
No, but that was something that didn't come out until Copy Edits, like much later on, and I was like, this is why I shouldn't be writing nonfiction, because in my version there would have been roses on it.
Sure, yeah, and we'll leave the truth to those people, right? We'll be good with ours. So there's this part where he's doing that, and it's just a couple sentences, which also I've read as like a, like maybe you telling yourself what you were supposed to do. And it said, those nights father went out walking. I imagined he found himself looking up at the familial scenes which presented themselves in the windows of the neighboring houses on Fay Mountain. Perhaps he was impressed with the scale of life they presented. The most important goal in life was to author something authentic, he'd tell us. There was something handsome in it. And I both love that idea, like the goal is to author something authentic, which I think you've done, which is nice. Matt. But also that word handsome for it, that there's something like a physical beauty to a thing that's a story that's authentic.
Yeah, I really like that idea.
It's good as yours.
You know, it was funny when we first went out with this book. I remember a comment from an editor who I won't name, but who was saying, you know, well, all of these details and whatever, but you know, it's a small book, and this is just everyday life of sort of ordinary people, and nothing in it really happens. And I thought to myself, like, it was such a fascinating comment to me, because I was actually thinking, like, so much happens in the book. I don't want to, like, give it all away, but, like, someone dies, there's, like, a questionable, like, rape scene. I mean, there's all kinds of things happening, and I'm like, you know, and so as I was thinking about it, I was thinking, like, maybe sort of what she's actually saying is, like, the scale of these people's lives, you know, living in this, like, very middle-class, rural, like, American town in the 90s, is, like, unmeaningful or unimportant. And I think I realized that, like, you know, for a kid, it is all of those sort of smaller things within that moment in time that makes something like, you know, a rural road feel really majestic. I mean, there was a part of the novel, too, that I ended up cutting, but that said something like, because it was before the internet, like, you know, those were the days when, like, you could ride a bike down a road and, like, your soul's location on the earth was literally dictated by, like, where the sun was in the sky. And we've lost that kind of, like, innocence now. I mean, unfortunately, like, we all have our cells and different things. But I think I yearn for that in life in general. And now I live in a rural place again, so I think, yeah, all my photos are always of, like, these small things. Everyone's like, you missed the whole crowd. I'm like, yeah, but there's, like, a bug on that person's ear, and I got that part of it.
There's a Leif Botchman essay that was in N+1 a couple years ago. I think it's called Short Story or Novel, and she's sort of talking about, like, the opening stories of American short stories. And she gets to this part later in the essay where she's making this sort of, I want to use the word accusation, which sounds too strong, but maybe it's still right, that young American writers are not interested enough, like, in the lives they've actually, like, led or lived. Like, it's always, we're going to locate story elsewhere. We're going to do these other things. We're going to make story really big. And I think what I admire about your book is maybe the thing that editor was seeing that was there, but then not seeing how that was of worth in a way that's too bad. Because I think that focus on sort of that granular is like that, like, you're right, that's the scale at which you live life is, like, really close.
Well, and I think that that's there in your work too. You know, so as I was going through the stories, I was thinking, like, you know, beyond those, like, beautiful kind of call and response repetitions, so much of your stories start with, like, you know, these imperatives, like, remember, now. I was thinking, well, all of the words are really, like, 2-cent words, right? In a great way. I mean, you know, like, I feel like so often, like, students hand in writing and they've got all of these, like, really big, like, gorgeous sentences, you know, that always have the word beauty in them or something. And I was thinking, like, the beauty of your prose is that you then take all of those really small words and put them together in a way that makes that kind of call and response happen, you know? And it is a lot about ordinary life, but isn't life extraordinary enough that we can write about it?
Absolutely.
I mean, someone in your book had a baby that was, what, like, you know, mulling around in the earth.
These things happen, I'm told. Well, I think, so I had a speech impediment when I was growing up, and then you'll still hear in certain words that I was taught, I couldn't pronounce them, so I was taught to overpronounce them.
That's fascinating. Did you know Gary Lutz also kind of talks about that?
Yeah, I could see that, And so I have, like, there's some words I'll say, if I say something, like, important, I'll say the middle T too hard. I used to not say T's in the middle word. Like button, I'll, like, overhit that T. And my name is Matthew, so that's problematic if you don't say the T's in the middle of words. Which is not great, so I was just a nameless child roaming the earth, and
that says it all.
Well, I know, right?
That's like those are all your kids' names.
Right. And so, but at some point, in grad school, I think I started thinking about that and, like, this idea about, like, what language you were going to use and the words you were going to use, and I got this idea in my head that I wouldn't use words that I couldn't comfortably say out loud. Like, I wouldn't. You know, like, I didn't want to like put on airs with my language, even though obviously, like, I'm often writing in these sort of, like, archaic sort of rhythms and sort of elevated language. I'm certainly not, like, an everyday speech kind of writer, but, like, the material of those speeches is that, and it was partly, in some way to be true to, like, what my capacity for language actually was, which was those words and not these others. Which is not to say I don't have my favorite fancy words that I put in, like, every single story and, like. seem to not be able to stop using, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, not to transition too
Sure.
quickly into your like Lish days of
Sure,
studying
yeah,
here,
yeah.
but so one of the reasons the center so graciously asked us here is that we both took classes. So Matt studied with Gordon Lish and I studied with Diane Williams. And I have a funny letter, a little section that I'm going to read of
yeah,
Lish's.
that's right.
But it also reminded me that one thing Diane told me that Lish was always saying was, beyond like, okay, no adjectives, no adverbs, like modifiers aren't your friends, which I tend to agree with, but no colors. And all of your stories lack color descriptions except that one where it starts with like, it's about the hospital, like white wall, white room, and white, and like color is sort of like in the fore. I would say color is like a character in that piece. But other than that story, you make like very sparing use of any kind of description whatsoever. So I wondered if that came from a Lish thing or if that's just...
I think it comes from fairy tales, like first, which are like a big influence on me. It's like the abstraction that's in fairy tales, like how little description you need to like set something in motion. Like, like Little Red Riding Hood is my favorite fairy tale, and there's a story in this that's like a serial retelling of Little Red Riding Hood. There's like 40 versions of Little Red Riding Hood.
I can see that, yeah.
But I like what do you physically know about Little Red Riding Hood, right? It's like literally that, right? Just this girl in this cape like running through the woods, and like the rest of it you fill in. And I like that about it. And I remember Lish talking about that, about like some of those description things. It doesn't matter if a window is red or green or like, unless it really does. Like that's just information. It's not like what stories are made out of. And I think there's some truth to that. When I worked as an editor at a magazine and a press for a number of years.
I didn't know that actually.
And I worked at Dzank for a couple of years, and then I edited the Collagist online. I was the founding editor there and edited it for 4 years. And I remember really specifically editing a story with a writer, and it had kind of like weird character names. They were like distracting character names, like where people are named like Tiberius and whatever, right? Like it's just a story about a couple in a hotel room, and it was like and it was like, well, why do they have these names? Like, and it was like, well, what could they just be like he and she? Because there's only these two people in the story. They never go anywhere else. The relational thing is what's important. And so, and she was sort of keen to that idea, and I think that's maybe that same idea. Like, can you strip it elementally? I use a lot of titles: the husband, the mother, the father, the boy.
Yeah, I love that about it. Yeah, absolutely.
And because they're relational, right? Like to know two characters are husband and wife sets a relationship in motion.
Well, and I think
to know
it gives it
Jack
like an
and Wendy does
allegorical
nothing,
thing
right?
too,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Like the husband, the mother. It's like we're talking about like God almost. You know what I mean? Like in the same way that those tropes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I liked that about it.
A student of mine, I just had a great book come out called Of This New World. Her name's Allegra Hyde. She was a student I worked with at ASU. She's really fantastic. And we just did an interview together, and we were talking about that nameless thing. And she made actually a fantastic counter-argument, which I feel is worth saying, talking about her writing as a woman and writing about women characters. And she's like, felt like for her, so many women through history and women characters had their sort of identities sort of reduced to these roles, that for her it was like this opposite thing where it felt somehow morally wrong to have women that were reduced to like the role of like the mother or something. I thought like that was really interesting too. And so I've had that sort of as a challenge in my mind, as a counterpoint to my default thing, which is the role is more important than the name. But yeah, I think she's maybe right about that too.
There's a little bit of that in White Nights actually too, where because Jean can't remember the name of the babysitter, the bleeder, you know, and she calls her Kay as in the letter rather than like Katja or whatever she's supposed to be named after. But I always feel like that's funny. I really like your students' comment, but I feel like as a woman,
she's smart, but she's challenging us, and we don't like it.
I don't know. I would kind of rather just be like A with a capital letter than anything else, because I feel like then I can just stand without interpretation.
Yeah, it's like freeing, right, not to have a name. Yeah, see? I think we're having weird existential things that are maybe personal to us.
Possibly, very possibly.
Yeah.
Wait, should I read this funny part from this letter?
Yeah.
Are people in the mood for some humor? Well, the name Gordon Lish means something to some folks, I would think so. Regardless, it's just a funny letter. I was teaching this class on pedagogy the other day to grad students about how to teach creative writing, and Alan Ziegler had brought this in when I had taken the class. So it's a letter called A Kind of Magnificence.
Sure.
Speaking of grandiose visions. It says this, I guess that's a microphone. It says, this is from an introductory letter sent last summer by Gordon Lish to students enrolling in his fall fiction writing workshop. Students pay, and I think this may be dated because I believe it's more expensive now, $2,400 each to attend a 12-week session, all of which are held in Manhattan apartments. Lish is the editor of the Quarterly and editor at Knopf. Okay, so Lish sends out this letter to his future students, and it says this: "It is absolutely unacceptable to me that this term not prove to be our most heroic yet. Everything points to the gathering in of amazements. Happy news comes to me from Luisa Ermelino, whose first novel has been placed with St. Martin's, and from Jennifer Allen, Patricia Lear, and Amy Hempel. It just happens that a number of old-timers, if only quondam teachers of fiction writing now, by my quick count, Yannick Murphy, Peter Christopher, Mark Richard, who Victoria Riddell, who was here, introduced me 2 years ago, and I still really love, and newly confirmed pal of Ye Gods, Jackie O, Jennifer Allen, Ted Payevich, Amy Hempel, and Diane Williams. Anyway, all the more reason why the source of their, quote, anxiety of influence must again redouble his efforts if he is to keep surpassing himself, a requirement, you have my word, he pledges himself to meet. Newcomers could not possibly know how arduous, how taxing an experience awaits them. Much is going to be asked of you, and altogether aptly, necessarily, for the profit that can come to you, that indeed these classes are beyond measure. If you cannot meet the basal test of decent relations with those who travel this distance with you, then resign now, because much, much more than the merely basal is going to be expected of you, else that there can be no learning from the grand degree that is the justification for the fame of these classes. In other words, boys and girls, be nice, be of clean heart and high mind. But if you cannot be, beat it now." And I mean, it just goes on to be equally as like, and I'm sure he's probably like totally self-aware, and that
that's
it's
very
supposed to be
performed.
like, it's a very
Yeah.
performative piece. But I wondered if you might speak to that, having studied with him, and what your experience was since we're here.
Yeah, I can say maybe just a little bit about it. So I took the class in part because I had realized at some point that a lot of the contemporary writers who were my favorites, were a big influence on me, people like Diane Williams and Kristen Scott and Sam Lipsyte and Brian Evanson and you know, I could go on, but like a lot of these people had in some ways passed through Lish's classes or had worked with him as an editor in different ways.
Totally,
And so there was this sort of strain of writers who had come through this sort of thing, and I wanted to see where they come from and what they got, and I think that was valuable in many ways to me. It was an interesting time. I just finished grad school. It was right after I did my undergrad. I'm from Michigan. I lived in Michigan my whole life until the last couple of years. I moved to Arizona, and I just finished grad school and was living in Michigan. And I had seen this class. I think he'd maybe taught it one more time the year before, but he hadn't taught it in a long time. So it seemed like maybe a rare opportunity.
Yeah.
And but I lived in Michigan, not in Manhattan. And I was working for a publishing company there. And the publisher who ran it, I started talking to him about it. And he's like, "This seems like a good opportunity." And he gave me some of the money I needed for the class, which I appreciate a lot.
Great.
And then on a lark, my last semester at grad school, a friend and I had hatched a plan to sell a like official licensed like Dungeons and Dragons novel that we would write under a pen name. And so we like wrote this outline for this like book about dwarves and elves like fighting evil, and sent it. And we
not surprising?
right. And so we sold that, and we're writing it. And I used the advance to fly to New York once a week to take this class, which is pretty great, I think. And so, so my Dungeons and Dragons money put me in this room, and it was great. And I feel like I learned a lot. One of the things I appreciate most, which I think is a little in that letter, is I think, you know, I mean, my MFA experience was fantastic, but one of the things I really loved here was that Lish set the bar very high for what was like even just acceptable work, much less like good work. I will say up front that I don't think he ever liked anything I read in class. Like I think he mostly was incredibly unimpressed with me, which maybe was to his again, he was probably right. And so I didn't get a lot, you know, in some ways, you know, I was there in this way where I was used to sort of things that I was bringing to classes being taken a different way, and I think that was good for me. But he set the bar very, very high, like extraordinarily high. I'm trying to remember the exact language he would use, but something to the effect of like, the people you're competing with are not the people you're in the room with. Some of people I was in the room with are here tonight, which is great. But they're like, whoever you think are the greatest like writers of your time and place and language. So he would mean like living writers writing in English in America for us, you know, which is like a really high bar when you're like starting out, right?
Well, a kind of magnificence.
Yeah,
That's
a kind of magnificence, right? And you know, I wouldn't be so bold as to say that's where I'm ending up or something, but it was great to have that like, this is what it means to do the work. And beyond just that kind of grandiose stuff, I think there was so much sort of granular detail and ideas about how fiction works and this incredible synthesis of literature and philosophy and his own ideas that came together. Somewhere in my notes I pulled out all the books he mentioned while we were in class together, and it was like 200 books, right? And I just started digging into those and reading those, and it was really helpful. So it was a powerful experience for me, and I was really lucky to have it, and I was lucky to see what those other people saw, you know, and to both realize that they'd gotten a lot out of it. I could see some of those like direct influences, and also to understand that they were going to be great writers anyway, right? Like, it was a place they came to study, but they had their thing that was theirs they already had, and that was reassuring as well.
Yeah. Totally.
How was your class with Diane? What was that like?
It was great.
I don't know why I said Diane like I know her. How was your class with Diane Williams?
So Diane Williams, who edits Noon, which a lot of people probably know who are here. Diane is, she is an exacting seamstress. I think I would put it that way. She is known for editing style of, you know, you send her a story, and one thing I really love about her, she does everything still like snail mail, very old school, never emails.
Right.
In fact, still, actually, I won't say anything about her email address, but there's something very amazing about it.
Is it AOL? I don't know. I just guessed.
I don't know. One of the last relics. But I always felt like it was just such a great honor to get that back because. And it was funny, I gave a reading at school the other day, and a student introduced me, and I was at first horribly embarrassed because they said, you know, when I had Annie in class, she would literally cross out like 90% of our sentences. And I hadn't even realized that I had like adopted this style, I guess, of being edited because that's how I'd always been used to it. And then she made some kind of a joke saying like, oh yeah, we all loved her anyway, it was okay. But like the first time we all got our stuff back, we were like, I've never seen so much red on a page in my life. And so I always, now that I know that, I try to like start classes by saying like, the more red that's on there, like the more respect I have for whatever is there.
It wasn't what we're working on, you wouldn't do that.
Yeah, and I think Diane was really similar. One interesting thing she said that might be worth sharing is she had this, which is might be something that Lish was interested in too, but she said, okay, so fiction, I want to make sure I get this right. So nonfiction was an inverted triangle, where if you had 3 layers of the triangle, the top layer of it was the news. So in nonfiction, you know, if you think like, okay, I'm writing a piece for the newspaper, you've got to get like all the news in the first sentence, like, you know, who died, what time, like Michael Anderson died at 5:25 p.m. in Philadelphia from a gunshot wound. You know, I mean, all of the like who, what, when, where, whys in that like beginning, and that the news is the most important, and in nonfiction maybe takes up the most space. And then she said, you know, under that is like this thing called voice, which is like, you know, the singing, like, okay, you hear a Joni Mitchell song and you're like, yes, I know that's Joni Mitchell, or you hear, you know, and then the bottom of it is authority. So meaning, you know, this smallest kind of thing at the bottom. And so her whole thing about fiction was like, okay, so, you know, rather than inverting the triangle, what if we write it like that again, so that the top of the triangle is still the news, and it's got to be damn sharp. I mean, it's the pinnacle of the triangle. It's like, you know, it's got to be spot on, or you've got nothing, basically. Like, if it's wrong, you know, then you're totally out to sea. But, like, it's the top of the triangle, which is, like, the smallest part, meaning, like, the who, what, when, where, why is what so many people get tripped up on, you know, kind of. And then her argument was, like, voice is the thing that supports that. And then under voice's authority, which is the thing that I think she and Lish would say, like, few people ever get towards, right, in their argument, like, authority being that thing. And I always really appreciated that way of thinking about it, and have definitely, like, used that in teaching myself. But I think about it a lot in my own work, I think, too, because it somehow frees me up from thinking, like, gosh, you know, I have to be so concerned about this, like, the hero's journey and traditional ideas of plot and things like that, and instead think, like, okay, well, if the news can be specific enough to, like, and the voice strong enough to support it to get to this other, like, authoritative thing, then that's what you're going for, right?
Yeah, I like that a lot. I actually read you describing that in an interview earlier today when I was getting ready to see you again, and I was thinking about how I would stay a step ahead of you, and I still don't have anything better than that. It's so good. But it makes you think. I'm teaching a novel writing class this semester. I teach at Arizona State University MFA program there, and I've taught it a couple of times before, and the way I teach it is generative. Like, students aren't allowed to bring in anything. They have to, like, everybody starts a novel on day one, and they have to write like this much a week, and we just, like, charge, and we're sharing. Someone has to, like, share for workshop after they've been working on it for like 2 weeks, right? So we're sharing deep process, you know. Or the idea that, like, the only thing you can study in books, like these finished books, you can study product, right? But you can't see how they were written. You can't learn anything about how they were written from reading them most of the time. And so that we're sharing our process and talking about that. But it's really funny because they start off very bravely in this, like, I don't know anything about what I'm writing. And the first week they have all this, they bring in their, like, best thing they have so far, and it's interesting and alive to them. And the next week they come in, they're like, I've been writing for 2 weeks and I don't have a plot yet. And and the books they love aren't super plotty. It's just like this idea of in their heads that, like, a novel has to be like the news, right? And trying to, like, relax them on that a little bit is like a weird sort of thing to get them to do. I want to ask a question maybe about voice, which is that second thing, because obviously I think we're both people who care a lot about the way language sounds and the way sentences are built. And I know you have a background as a singer, right? As a choir interpreter, a little bit.
Yeah.
Is that like an influence on how you think of sentences, or is it just like another time you were sort of enamored with the musicality of language?
I think so. I guess, you know, it's funny. There are a few teachers in my life that really shaped me now that I'm thinking about it. And one of them was an old voice teacher of mine, Dave Seaman, who kind of would have fit in this book, actually. Like, lived on the side of, like, Route 9 and in his small cape, and he was our music teacher in school, and everybody loved him. I mean, he was, like, you know, saved people's lives, that type of person. And I used to go for voice lessons with him once a week, and he had this, like, upright piano in his little basement, which was kind of, like, moldy, and I, like, remember it really fondly for some reason. And he said, like, your mouth, and I think this is something Lish was talking about too, like, your mouth is actually an instrument. So it's like a cavern where, like, if you can make more sound if you actually raise the soft palate of your mouth. So that's gonna, like, let you go higher, right? And, like, you know, that's, rather than reaching for a note, you think about landing on a note. Like, so coming down on a note from up high rather than, like, reaching for the note from down below. And I think that definitely influenced me a lot in terms of how I think about sentences, because I feel like if a sentence is, like, trying to reach for something from below, the reader's always going to feel that effort, like, and feel troubled by that. Whereas if it's, like, landing on something, and this other interview with Lish that we published in Gigantic that this woman, Chloe Cooper Jones, did, he said,
who was in the class here with me.
Who was great. And Lish said this funny thing, like, right with the menace of death at hand, and like, students are always like, oh, what does that mean? And I was like, you know, I think the closest approximation to that is, he makes fun of Grace Paley. I don't know why, but he says, you know, didn't she write that story, like, the loudest voice? And he says, like, oh, you know, she didn't actually have the loudest voice, but she just kept writing, like, over and over and over. And I think she had a really amazing voice personally. But and so I think he felt that way about, like, voice also. You know, that was the thing that was gonna, like, a voice had to be singular. It had to be its own, or else it, like, wasn't anything at all. Kind of. Which is interesting, you know. Yeah,
I think I absolutely agree with that. You know, just thinking about sort of like practical things as we're talking about craft and stuff. And I think one of the things in music I like best, that I know I like best in music, is songs where the difference between, like, the quietest and the loudest part of the song are really far apart. That quiet, loud dynamic is just really pleasing. Like, when a rock song's just sort of rumbling along and it gets real big, and then, you know, we like that so much. and thinking about that in prose, and what does that mean in prose to go from quiet to loud?
Yeah.
And I think, for better or worse, my default sometimes is like just to like try to go loud all the time. Like I just want to, right? Like I want. It's not good. That's a bad thing, right?
That's so funny because I would say, like as a reader of your work, I would say, and one of my questions was like, it's sort of the opposite.
Oh, good.
Actually, was like.
Then I'm revising well.
No, I was kind of thinking about your sentences, thinking like the beauty of them is that the words are the like very simple words. Like
oh, sure. No, I agree with that.
That way
yeah,
is
yeah,
like.
Yeah.
But more than that, there's like a real sense of control, right?
Yeah.
So the first story is like, kind of reminds me of Bartholomew. Did you ever read that craft piece? This is a great essay if you teach. It's really funny and kids laugh. It's like, what is it called? It's George Saunders talking about Rise, Baby, Rise. How do you construct a story? And he makes this argument that like Bartholomew's story, the school, is basically just escalation. Like, okay, you know, they're in a classroom and everything's dying, from the plants to the hamsters to like the the what is he called, the orphan student who's adopted. Like suddenly people start dying, and like it's just this pattern of simple escalation. But then there's this like larger moral question that comes in, which is, should he make love to this woman on a desk in front of the children? Because the children have like lost all feeling that morale, like.
And they want to like see what like love is, right, or something.
Yeah, they want to see what love is, and it's like an actual question, like, will the narrator make love to Helen in front of these children, as if that would be like a good thing? Which I'm not going to comment on that, but yeah, like, and so it reminded me, okay, of this opening story because A Tree, a Person, or a Wall. Is built like that, right?
Yeah.
Like everything just kind of escalates through this really nice, like controlled tension, and that's the pattern of the story. You know?
Yeah, I think maybe I was thinking about more like at like the sentence level, where like I think in my first novel, I think there's like one short sentence. Like in the rest of the sentence are these big, long, loping things. And sometimes I'd be giving a reading and I'd hit that one short sentence and I'd be like, that's nice. That little one is nice, you know?
Yeah.
And I think I taught this class, I'd never taught before, and sort of developed it partly to think about it, about sentence acoustics and style. And we read like 4 or 5 writers a week. So we read like 45 or 60 individual sort of fiction writers, mostly pretty contemporary, a lot of stuff in translation, some, you know, just a handful of people even who like passed away, very contemporary.
I love you to send that.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Anybody who's interested, just email me. I'd be glad to share the reading list. But one of the things we found over and over and over again was that the people we thought were the best sentence writers were the people who varied their sentence length the most. Like they were playing that instrument, going long, going short, like sort of varying that, like short, 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 long, 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 short. They're sort of like varying those sentence lengths. And no matter how good their vocabulary was, all these things, the unifying feature of like these like great prose writers was that they played sentence length as an instrument.
Yeah.
And that seemed really, I've been trying to think about that a lot in the new writing I'm doing, because it just seems like an obvious way to bring a lot of attention to something. I'm very obsessed, you probably can see that in the thing I read tonight, but I'm very obsessed with repetition.
Yep.
I think about repetition a lot, and for a while I was studying a lot and looking for it in different places. And this is probably really obvious, but like what gives repetition its power is difference. So like same, different. And the different thing gets like a ton of attention, right? So it's the same thing I think with sentence length, really. It's like you're doing all these over and over and over again. Same, different, same, different. You know, you're doing those things in a way that should feel invisible, but will somehow be like felt in the body in an interesting way.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that reminds me of like my favorite story in here, the one about how everybody, how the family all died. It's like a list of how
an
the
index
people
of how our
were-
family
index
was
of
killed,
how, which is such a funny title.
It's the only funny part
I
about
guess
the
we're
story.
also both just so morbid. I'm like laughing along with you. I'm like, oh yeah, these people died. The index of the family who died and were shot. But there's also this other thing in your book, which is like a celebration of the grotesque. So a lot of Matt's stories end with, I don't want to give them away too much, but like Doll Parts is a story about a girl who loses her brother, who wants a doll that is built like a boy. The mother sews the doll as a boy, and then the girl ends up like actually breaking the doll open and consuming all of the doll, like
the stuffing.
The stuffing from the doll as a way of like trying to reclaim the dead brother. And that same thing is echoed in the. Just so they know how dark
it makes
you
me sound
are, I'm
super
gonna
healthy.
go there
Yeah,
so they know. The last story is very similar, but it's actually with a young boy's body, a father who had watched his son die, and then actually begins to dig into the body of the son. The opening story is about a man who's literally like hacking up a goat, like digging into the body. So I have to ask you about this like recurring image.
I mean, what is
huge.
inside people?
I just
don't know.
That's what I'm asking.
Actually, you know what's funny is I make this a joke, but and maybe this will be the last anecdote I'll share before we take some audience questions, because we should do that before we end. But I was a very bad college student. I dropped out of college a couple times. Partly I just didn't know what I wanted to do, and I just kept coming in and out. But at one point I went back to a community college, and I had to take this like just as like a gen ed science class. I took like an anatomy class. But it was just memorization. Like, it was just like, where are all the bones in the body? And it's just like, I'm not a good memorizer. I find that very boring. And I didn't really like to do the work, but it wasn't a super hard class. And at some point, the last thing I had to do was I had to give this big presentation on like a disease of my choice, right? I had to just pick a disease and give like a PowerPoint presentation about it. But that seemed boring. And also, I had not really been doing the work. So like, I didn't really know a lot. And so
I would have loved that assignment. As like
right.
my OCD, obsessional childhood self, I would have been like, yes.
Well, so I made up a disease. And I got all these like slides from like other diseases, and I like photoshopped them and like layered them. And I put way more work in it than if I had just done the assignment. And it had like its own thing, and I made up like sources. I had like footnotes, and like they were made up journal articles. And it might be one of like my great fiction performances, is like getting a B- in this anatomy class at Delta Community College in Michigan. Yeah, so I don't know what's inside people, and
well, and but it's about the heart.
No,
for
absolutely,
you, right?
of course.
I mean, no,
yeah,
and
it's
literally
like essence
in the stories,
and like right,
that's what
like
they're always looking for. Like, and I mean, not that.
Well, our memories of people are like the physical, which is what you're so good at, and that granular detail of like. Of the things we remember, their clothes, or the way, I think that passage of it where she's wearing the bathing suit that's alluring, and the way that she sees like to cordon off, it has like things where you can see on the side of the bathing suit, right? You can see parts of her, and she's so aware that like showing part of me is better than showing all of me in the way that's alluring. And our memories of people are so like tactile, and so like your father's cigar things, and there's smells of our parents, and so I think that's it. It's that staying very, very, very close to the body as often as possible. Yeah. And when characters refuse that, maybe they have to go further in some ways, because that's ending. Yeah.
No, it's a delightful surprise when they do, I think.
That's so nice. We should talk to you guys for a while. Yeah, please.
You're talking about sentence length and the variation of it.
Yeah.
What about paragraph length and chapter?
I think the same thing, right? Like it's sort of a long paragraph that's punched out with a single sentence paragraph, puts a lot of focus on that sentence, right? Yeah, absolutely. Chapter length, for chaptering is like a mystery to me. Like if anyone has like a really strong theory of how to chapter a novel, I'd be super up for learning that. But I think it's similar, right? Like they mostly have to be similar, and then like someone that's really different will get a lot of attention. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. I think that's absolutely right. Yeah, please.
Annie, I wonder if you could talk a little more. You used the phrase "call and response" about Matt's first reading.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could talk more about why it resonated to you that way and what effect you think it has.
Yeah, I mean, I love that about music and writing in general. I mean, I guess I think when I think about classical music, like I think, okay, like Mendelssohn's Song Without Words, a series of like classical little short pieces that he made. Always, always, always the opening is repeated, right? And you would never dare play that opening the same way twice, you know, because it'd be boring. Like it just, you know, that's not the point of it. That the second time you play it, it should tell a completely other story. And I think that's what that I mean by like the call and response of repetition in fiction is that it recalls the thing, but then somehow undermines or destroys the thing by being different from the thing it's like quoting in the beginning. Much like music, I think, in that way. And so the place that came from was the Philip Lope essay. He was the editor that collected the Great American Essays. He's sort of a mixture of more traditional essays, everybody from like Montaigne to contemporary people. But he wrote this beautiful description of James Baldwin's Stranger in the Village, where he says, like, you know, as much as Baldwin sometimes goes off on these very like theoretical tangents about religion and you know, these big subjects that he can sometimes get mired in, the thing that always like brings the intellectual argument back is that call and response pattern. And he makes this argument that it was because Baldwin grew up in his dad's church where he was a preacher, so perhaps hearing that kind of like oratory style. There's something commanding about that, you know?
I think that's part of it for me, yeah. I was growing up very religious and like sort of those.
Did you?
Sort of,
I was going to ask that, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, which maybe all I have to say about it, but I think that's maybe a lot of people, you know, sort of. I grew up very religious and was very, very deeply personally religious for a long time, and now mostly not. But I think like I grew up Catholic and haven't thought of myself as Catholic for probably half my life now. But at the same time, like that's where I'm from in a lot of ways. Like those sounds and those stories and those shapes,
parable story,
yeah.
like nature to a lot of your stories.
Yeah, it's like being from the Midwest, like being from America, you know, it's like I could say like I don't want to be that anymore, but I'd still be it, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Please.
So just to come back to that, so it's like a pattern of invoking a certain like rhythm or cadence and then like altering, like the response is like it comes back to it, but in like a new or you know.
Yeah, I think you just said it so beautifully. I mean, that's what echoes are, right? I mean, it's like, you know, when an echo thing echoes, you don't hear the echo in the exact same way that you heard the original sound. And there's something haunting about that. But there's enough of the echo that recalls the original sound that your mind can go back to it. Maybe that's what poetics is. I don't know. Gary Lutz, who I also really like, said this thing, like, he wanted all of his sentences to have the musical quality of an aphorism, you know, but at the same time to be able to have the like traditional, I think he said the traditional load-bearing traction of, you know, a sentence that was essentially like a piece of wood, a builder, something you could make things out of. And I think I feel that way about sentences. Like if they can do both of those things, which most sentences can't, then you're probably doing something right.
I think like repetition in general works that way. Like where like Gertrude Stein talks about that a lot. Like right, like if you say the same thing over and over again, the second time you say it, it already is influenced by it having been said the first time, right? So like you remember that. Like you say the same word over and over and over again, like it's interesting for a while, and then it gets boring, and then it gets funny, and then it gets irritating, and then it gets right. Like the word is, you're not saying the same thing over and over, and you're not hearing it the same way. And I think like music is a really good example of call and response, just the verse-chorus sort of combination. The way that in a good song, the last time you hear the chorus, it should feel different than the first time you heard it. And there's that sort of calling back. But I think some of that, like the literal call and response, like I say something, you say something, is just those modes invoke a relationship with the reader or with the listener, and they have power too. I think several of Toni Morrison's books start with like sort of like invitations to story, which is the same thing as like Once Upon a Time is an invitation to story, or like come here, I'm going to tell you a tale, or like and so you invoke a relationship using those structures that seems useful, like to invite the person into this thing you're doing.
Yeah. I think so.
Maybe like one more? Yeah.
I was just going to say, there's something tied in with what you've just talked about. The musician Brian Eno, who's produced 50 people, in the mid-70s, he created this series of cards.
It's the best.
These strategy cards with this Bavarian artist, Peter Schmidt. And it was 100 cards with a black face and a white face. And on the white side, there were all these aphorisms. And one of them is, repetition is a form of change.
Nice.
Love that. Thank you. It's beautiful.
I can't beat that. That feels like a nice note to go
Yeah,
out on.
let's go out on that one.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Annie.